Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about all the books that I managed to read in the month of June, and I'm shocked. I have 14 books to talk about today in this video. Now, granted, 4 of those are DNFs, so we're gonna get through those first, and the majority of these were all audiobooks. I have a newborn. Audiobooks are my life right now. I'm able to get through quite a lot of books that way. I always go in the order of my enjoyment, so we're going to start with the DNFs and then the lowest rated, work our way up to what is my favorite book of last month. So starting with the DNFs, these are unfortunate. These are in chronological order, no order to the DNFs. The first that I DNF'd is A History of Wild Places by Shea Ernshaw. Now, this is one that I probably gave, I think it was about 30% of the way through on the audiobook. And A History of Wild Places was on my must-read list of this year. I had to try it out. It's one I got from Book of the Month, and it is a mystery novel with what is considered magical realism elements in it, but it's much more of a mystery. That's how it reads. I would definitely classify this as a mystery, and I actually really liked the beginning of this book. I really liked the first perspective that we got, and I was very intrigued to keep going with it after reading about that first perspective. Problem is, then we switch perspectives and we don't get the first perspective that we had gotten for a long time after that. It becomes much more about some other perspectives that get introduced, and it is a cult story, which I didn't realize. That's something that it's not something that I hear and I immediately write off a book, but the way that the book was reading, I just didn't care. I really didn't care about the characters. I was like missing the first perspective that we had gotten. I did not care at all about the other perspectives, and I was just getting really uninterested in it. The beginning was so promising, so it was a little bit of a disappointment when I started to lose interest. The next one that I DNF'd was Ask Again Yes by Beth Keane. This was surprising to me because these are the types of books that I usually love. Like, there are a couple of others that have similar vibes to this one that I loved this month that I'll talk about. But for me, this one, this is a familial drama. It is a contemporary novel, very much focusing on a couple different families living in these suburbs. They're all police officers, and something really horrible happens that ends up causing like this schism in their neighborhood and among these neighbors and these close families. And you're following kind of 2 generations of these families, like the parents and then the kids of those parents, and how their relationships are affected by this really horrible thing that happens. And it wasn't that this was boring me or anything like that. For me, with these types of stories, I have to feel very interested in like the characters themselves, and I just really didn't care. This is just one that I was just not feeling at all. For some reason, like the characters were off to me. The plot itself, I did not care about. It was so weird. I don't know. And I gave this like a really good shot. I gave this like 50% of the audiobook and was like, I just was really uninterested. So that's all I have to say. I mean, there was nothing bad that the book was doing. The writing was fine. The story, I can see why other people would love it, but for me, there was something like not connecting. So yeah, that one was kind of a surprise to me. Another big surprise, because this was a 5-star prediction for me, is Violetta by Isabel Allende. And I'm so surprised that I didn't love this, and the fact that I DNF'd it, that's even more shocking to me. Historical fiction's really tough for me. Very hit or miss. The main character of Violetta, you're getting stories about everyone surrounding Violetta through her perspective, but then you're not getting her story. Like, she is telling you all of these other people's stories without like reflecting on her own. And that style of storytelling did not work for me in this one. I gave this about 30% of the way through the audiobook, and that's when I kind of started to realize like why it wasn't connecting with me, why I was kind of bored by it, because I like characters who are telling their own stories, or you're in a perspective, whether it's third or first person, and they're like reflecting or they're telling their own stories, but you were getting all of the other side characters' backstories and narratives through Violetta, but you weren't getting Violetta's story. I don't know. It was very odd. It was a very odd execution of this story, and it wasn't one that was connecting with me. So I thought that this was going to be 5 stars. I'd heard great things about it, but for some reason that writing style and that execution, just it was causing me to just not connect at all with anything that was going on. So this was a huge shock to me. Huge shock. The last DNF I have to quickly mention is The Infinity Quartz by Akemi Bowman. This is one that was a YA sci-fi, and I had picked it up a couple years ago, and to be honest, if I had seen it in a bookstore today, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. I think my tastes have changed quite a lot from when I first picked this book up. I really don't reach for young adult much at all anymore. I got about 50% of the way through the audiobook. I got through a huge chunk of this book, and I really liked the beginning. I really liked the beginning. We're following a girl who she's just graduating high school, about to go into college, and she dies. And so the Infinity Court is kind of like this afterlife, this place where you go once you die, and something's happened where this AI has hacked into the afterlife, and there's kind of a war happening for the afterlife that our main character gets recruited into. Cool concept, weird execution. I really liked the beginning. Again, like the part where you're getting the build up to the inciting incident, and then the initial like figuring out what's going on, really liked. And there was some interesting world building in the afterlife, but then it started getting like really weird. Like the concept itself like sounded cool on paper, but then when I was listening to the book, like the idea of like AI hacking the afterlife, I was like, I don't think I quite understand how any of this makes any sense whatsoever. And like the book was not doing a good job of like making me suspend my disbelief to like believe that that would actually be a thing. And then there were like different courts inside of the afterlife that were like run by different princes, and then it kind of fell into like all those YA tropes that I'm just a little bit done with now. So it wasn't bad by any means. It just became something that unfortunately I think I've just kind of grown out of. So yeah, I would still recommend it if it sounds cool to you, because again, I don't think it's badly written. Like, it was well written, characters were interesting, it had some cool ideas, but yeah, just not for me anymore. Now let's talk about all the books that I did finish. So this could be a while. Grab yourself a coffee. Let's chat. All right, the least favorite book that I have from this last month, I gave this 2.5 stars. It was The Girl Who Could Move Shit With Her Mind by Jackson Ford. This is one that was on my must-read list of the year, and so I got through it. And I thought I would love this. It says Alias meets X-Men, and I've been told it's very like Jessica Jones-esque. If anyone watched Jessica Jones on Netflix, I loved that. And I can see why it gets those comparisons. The main character of Tegan Frost, who you're following, has psychokinesis. She can move stuff with her mind, and she does feel very like Jessica Jones. She's sassy, she doesn't take any crap, she is very independent, and she basically is like undercover working for this secret government kind of operation with these other characters. And she discovers someone else who has psychokinesis. She thought she was the only one in the world who had this power, and she finds out someone else has it. And so she's kind of on a hunt for whoever this other person is and trying to find out things about herself through that, all that. And at first I really liked Tegan Frost as a main character, and I liked her voice. And then I started to get irritated with her. About halfway through, I was like, all right. She's a very, very strong personality. So it's like either you're going to love her or you might get irritated by her like I did, and started off really enjoying her and then was like, no. So the plot itself, this is very action-packed. It's very fast-paced. It kept me engaged. It kept me entertained, especially like the first third of it, and the last third of the book was very entertaining. The middle chunk felt a little bit like aimless at times. Like, where are we going? What are we doing? This is getting repetitive. But then it kind of picks up towards the end. Problem is, the very, very end, like the very last thing, the very last scene we get, I really didn't like. I was like very frustrated with how this book ended. And it kind of brought it from a 3 to a 2.5 star with like the very last scene that we got. The whole time I was like, yeah, this is probably a 3 star. And I was trying to give it enough of a chance before DNFing. And I got to a point where I had listened to like 60% of it. I was like, oh no, I think this is going to be a 3 star, but do I DNF it at this point when I only have so much more to listen to? So this is one that I was like debating DNFing for a while, and I should have just done it. But I was like, oh, I don't want to DNF it that far in, so I should have just done it. But yeah, unfortunately, this just was like not for me. I'm not going to continue on with the series, but I do think other people could really enjoy it. So if it sounds interesting to you, give it a shot. I think you'll figure out in the first half of the book whether or not you're going to enjoy it based off of, you know, how you're liking and connecting with Tegan Frost as the main character. But for me, it just didn't totally work. So 2.5 stars. And then I gave another book 2.5 stars as well. And I'm so sad about this one. I'm so disappointed. It's The Endless Vessel by Charles Soule. Oh man, this is one I've read from this author twice before, and I really enjoyed his other books I've read, especially The Oracle Year by this author. I love that book. 5 stars. So when I saw his newest release and I then sent it for review, I was so excited. And unfortunately, it just did not work. I could see what the author was trying to do here. This book takes the idea of, like, it definitely references COVID directly, and it reflects on that time, and it's discussing themes of like depression after going through something like that, and as a collective, like starting to feel disenchanted with the world, and what happens when people lose their way, people lose their happiness. How do you get that back? And again, like, I can see what the author was going for. The messaging, the themes were very, very on point. And for me, it was just not, it was not discussing those things in a very in-depth way that made it like an interesting conversation starter. Like, it was just so on point and so in your face with its messaging and its themes. And it had like some cool ideas, but the execution of it just didn't make a whole lot of sense at times. And then halfway through the book, you go from having like your main character's perspective and you switch to a different character's perspective, and you go back in time, like way back in time, like the 1700s. And you get like this really long chunk of the book in the past, and that felt totally unnecessary. You could have done so many other things to have conveyed that part of the plot to the reader without having to take a total detour from the rest of the story to like go back in time for a third of the book to explain how this thing came about. It felt very, very disjointed, and it totally took me out of the story. Unfortunately, this is one that there were just several things that ended up not working well at all for me. I gave it 2.5 stars. I'm so sad. 3-star book. Man, oh man. It sounds like a tough reading month, but wait until I get to my good ones. I have so many good ones. Okay, let's get through some of the other mediocre ones. One by One by Ruth Ware. I think I'm done with Ruth Ware. I'm good. I'm done. Every one of her books, except for Turn of the Key, even that one was not like a favorite. Every single one of her books always is just kind of underwhelming to me. They're very forgettable. This is one that's like an isolation mystery where people are going missing on a ski trip and one person's the murderer, who done it. You're figuring it out alongside the characters. It felt very predictable. Like, I didn't totally predict the twist, but once it's revealed, I'm like, oh, duh, of course. It wasn't like a fun reveal, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And I just always feel underwhelmed. They're always just the most forgettable stories for me with Ruth Ware, except for Turn of the Key. Unless there's someone out there who like really thinks something else by her is unbelievable, amazing. I've read 4 books, I think, at this point from her, and have really only enjoyed one. So yeah, this is another 3-star. It was entertaining enough, made me finish it, but it's one I easily could have DNF'd and just been okay with it. So yeah, I'm bummed. Ruth Ware is just, I don't think, for me. Okay, getting into like more positive books though. I finally read Salon of Sense by Josiah Bancroft, and this was for my patron book club that I have as part of my Patreon, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed certain aspects of this. I love Thomas Senlin as a main character. He was my favorite part of this book by far. There were other things that I really liked about it, but then there were other things that were just so strange and so weird. And I think the world building itself was what held this one back from being a favorite for me. I just didn't love the like aesthetic and setting of the story. The Tower of Babel is an interesting concept, but it ended up not being as much fun to explore that setting as I was expecting it to be. And the weirdness of some of like the directions of the plot that we went in just felt a little over the top. Like, it was just so strange at times. I was like, what are we doing here? But all this to say, I had an amazing live show with my patrons, and they convinced me to move on with this book. We had such a fun show and discussion around this book, and so many fun theories about where this series could go, that it totally sold me on continuing with the story, because there was enough that I liked that would intrigue me to continue on, especially Thomas Senlin as the character. He is fantastic. So I'm going to try Arm of the Sphinx with all of my patrons in August to see if maybe the direction that the plot is taking and our theories that we have about where the series is going, whether they pay off and whether it starts to connect more for me. If it doesn't at that point, then I'll go ahead and DNF the series, but I'm definitely intrigued now after discussing with my patrons. So I'm excited to continue on the series because we're all continuing on with it together, and it'll be a lot of fun to discuss our progress. But if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't be continuing on with the series. So this was kind of a mixed bag. All the rest are 4 stars and above now. The first 4-star I have is Sankofa by Chibundu Onuzo. This is a beautiful story, beautifully written, of a woman who is rediscovering kind of her father. And she never had a relationship with her father. He was always absent. He had actually never been a part of her life once she was born. And she finds this journal that he had written when he was falling in love with our main character's mother. And our main character that we're following, she's half white and half African because her father is from Africa and her mother is British. And so she is at the point now in her life where her daughter is all grown up, her mother is now passed away, and so she's kind of now at this point where she's feeling lonely. She wants to reconnect with family, so she goes to Africa to reconnect with her father, to meet her father, and hopefully have a relationship with him. So it's this journey of self-discovery for our main character and discovering her roots and all that. And it was so good. It was so beautifully told. I really liked our main character. For me, this wasn't like a 5-star favorite. I think just because the plot itself, while I really enjoyed it, it just wasn't something that I absolutely was obsessed with, loved, but it was still really, really good. I'm so glad I read it. I highly recommend the audiobook. The narrator was fantastic for this story, and I just thought that the themes that were being explored were so beautiful. Highly recommend it. The next 4-star I have is The Wonder by Emma Donoghue, which is another must-read of the year for me. That I can check off now. Yay, I've been meaning to read this for so long. Finally did. This is an interesting one because this is a historical mystery novel that follows a nurse who gets hired by this family to monitor and watch this young girl who claims she has not eaten any food in 4 months. And the only thing she has eaten, drank is water for 4 months, which should not be possible. So everyone's kind of skeptical of this little girl and trying to figure out how is she doing this. So it was such an interesting mystery, and I loved our main character, and the reveals and such were so interesting, and the themes that are being explored while figuring out this mystery were so interesting. I just thought that this was really well done. It was the perfect length. It wasn't too long. It didn't drag on. It didn't get repetitive. The pacing was perfect. I really like Emma Donoghue's writing. I think she just tells a beautiful story, has really interesting dynamic characters that are very much like flawed, but you still root for them. I really like her storytelling, so I highly recommend The Wonder. It was really good. All right, and now we have my favorites from last month. My first 4.5-star book that I have, and my only 4.5-star book. I don't know why I said my first. My 4.5-star book that I have is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This is one that I wasn't sure I was going to love. I'd heard the themes were very on point, kind of hit you over the head with them, and they are, but I loved it because I love our main character. And yes, it's true that our main character, this takes place in like the 50s, 60s time period, and she does at times act like someone who would be a woman like in modern time, like nowadays. So yes, like all the criticisms that I've seen are very valid, and I don't disagree with any of the criticisms I've seen, but I was able to look past all of it because I loved our main character so much, and I loved all of the characters surrounding that main character so much, and I just loved all of the relationships. I loved the plot itself of this book. Was so much fun. It's about a woman who is a chemist, and she's in an industry, in an occupation that not a lot of women during her time are in, and so she gets hired to do this cooking show on TV, and she kind of makes it into like this chemistry related cooking show that is very like empowering to other women around the country. And I loved her. I loved how unapologetically herself she was. And I don't know, I just had so much fun. Like, it's not all fun. There are definitely some heavy things that happen in this book. Definitely check the content warnings for this book. There's quite a couple things that happen that are like unexpected and pretty intense, but overall, like outside of those things that happen that are a little more hard-hitting, the overall feeling of this book that I had was just, it was so much fun and enjoyable, and I loved our main character so much. So I'm so glad I read it. I highly recommend if some of the valid criticisms don't bother you too much. So yes, I'm so glad I loved it so much. And now I have 3 5-star books. I'm so excited. So the first 5-star book I have is A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. This was beautiful. I loved this book. This is following a Palestinian family, and it is following a woman who gets married into this very traditional Palestinian family in America, and it is just so powerful. The book itself is so powerful. The message, the themes, the things that the characters go through. This is a book that is going to stick with me for a very long time. While I wasn't reading it, I was thinking about it. So you're following kind of 3 generations of Palestinian American women growing up in America, but still trying to maintain their culture, maintain their roots, in Palestine, and it's such a examination of like Palestinian culture, the standards for women. A woman is no man, as the title suggests. You're really going to be following like women as they struggle with their lack of autonomy, their lack of independence, the expectations that are placed on them. It's just astounding and, again, so powerful. I can't believe this is a debut novel. You will love the characters. You will also be so frustrated with some of the characters. Oh my gosh, I felt so strongly the entire time towards like loving certain characters and just wanting to like shake other characters because you're just so frustrated and just want so much the best for them. So it's just such a beautiful story. I loved the character work so much, and it explored a culture that I know very little about and was just very eye-opening. It was beautiful. I will definitely be reading anything else by this author. I know they're coming out with another book this year that I would love to read. It's called Evil Eye. I'm definitely planning on reading that one. But this was beautifully written, really hard to read at times, very, very hard to read at times, but so powerful, and definitely is going to go down as like one of my favorites. We'll think about this one for a very long time. Next 5-star I have is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This was all over BookTube last year. It's still all over BookTube this year because it was all over BookTube last year. I finally read it. I loved it. I totally get why it's so hyped. I can also see why some people wouldn't enjoy this as much, but I loved this book. I am not a video gamer. I don't play a lot of video games, but this story being about two people who know each other very, very early on in childhood and grow up together and end up being video game designers together at the same company. They end up forming their own company and designing video games for a living. Exploring their occupation was so fascinating. I've never been more interested in a job than I am in video game designing. I didn't think I'd care as much as I did, but I was like super interested in learning all about how they're designing these video games and hearing their ideas and like seeing that industry. It was so interesting to me. And I'm not a gamer. So I think that that's a testament to the author's ability to keep you invested in something that even if you don't partake in it, you can still find so much interest in. The characters themselves are extremely flawed, but they're so wonderfully realized, and I loved exploring their relationships so much that I ended up loving them, even if at times they came across as very unlikable. They had moments of weakness and vulnerability, but it just made them feel so real, and I loved it. I loved it. So I loved this book. It was very emotional. There were really great times, really tough times, and I just loved the journey with these characters that they took. So, and I loved the ending. It was just perfect. So I can totally understand the hype. I can also see why people wouldn't like it, but I loved it. Finally, the last book, oh my gosh, I've been talking forever. The last book I have is my last 5-star book, and it's my favorite of the month, and it is The Combat Codes by Alexander Darwin. I did post a full spoiler-free review video for this that I will link down below, so I'm not going to go in depth here, but I loved this book because I love the main character so much. This is a sci fantasy story that's following a character named Seago, who is growing up in the underground combat rings, and he is essentially this fighter in this world where the way that you gain power in this world is by having like a combat fighter basically fight for your country in these martial arts style fighting matches. And so whichever country, whichever power has the most skilled martial artist fighter is the country with the most power. It's so fascinating. Just loved our main character of Seago, who is this young fighter in these underground combat rings and gets recruited to this elite training academy to become much more of a official like fighter. They're called grievers in this world. And he is such a good character. He gave me very much like Kaladin from Stormlight Archive vibes. He was fantastic. I loved the fight scenes in this book so much. The martial arts style fighting was so cool, so well choreographed, and the technology that's explored in this book, it being a sci fantasy, is so fascinating. So if you want my full thoughts, definitely go check out that review video. But overall, I loved the world, the technology, the fighting, and I loved our main character of Zigo so much. So those were all of the books that I managed to read in the month of June. Did you see any that you've read before? What did you think of them? Leave your comments down below. And what was your favorite book that you read in June? Let me know in the comments down below as well. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!